My brother-in-law attacked me, leaving me with a bloody face and a dislocated shoulder instead of helping. My sister coldly said, "You should have just signed the mortgage." This all happened because I refused to be the guarantor for their loan. Bruised, shaking, and barely able to stand, I dragged myself to my parents' front door begging for help. I knocked weakly, whispered for someone to open the door. Then I collapsed. What happened after that was so disturbing, even the police were left speechless. Gemini said the copper tang of blood was the first thing I tasted, a warm, rhythmic pulsing that matched the frantic hammering in my chest. I looked up from the floor, my vision blurring, to see my sister, the girl who used to kiss my scraped knees and check under my bed for monsters, standing over me with a face as cold and unyielding as granite. "You should have signed the mortgage, Audrey," she said, her voice devoid of a single tremor of regret, while I cradled a shoulder that felt like it had been wrenched from its very soul. It's funny how the people who are supposed to be your safety net can become the very ones who let you freefall. Growing up in our quiet, leafy corner of Michigan, Natalie wasn't just my older sister, she was my North Star. There's a 5-year gap between us, a distance that, during our childhood, made her seem like a titan. She was the protector who stood between me and every playground bully, the patient mentor who untangled the mysteries of long division at our kitchen table, and the confidant who held my hand through every heartbreak. We didn't have much, but we had a home built on the bedrock of my parents' wisdom. My dad, a high school economics teacher, didn't just teach the market, he lived by its rules. "Always have 6 months of life tucked away in a drawer," he'd say, tapping his temple while we sat at the dining room table, helping us navigate the terrifying world of our first savings accounts. My mom, a weary but dedicated nurse, echoed that sentiment with the practical grace of someone who saw life's fragility every day. They taught us that family was everything, but they also taught us that financial discipline was the wall that kept the world from caving in. Natalie, however, always had a bit of a leak in her pockets. She was the sister who lived for the now, the one who saw money as a means to a feeling rather than a foundation. I was the opposite. I was the girl who stayed late to finish the extra credit, the one who worked 3 part-time jobs while sweating through a business administration degree. I watched Natalie drift through majors and careers like a leaf in a storm, while I climbed the ladder at a marketing firm with a single-minded focus. By 29, I was an office manager. By 31, I had done the impossible in this economy. I bought my own 2-bedroom condo. It wasn't a palace, but every square inch of that crown molding represented a Saturday I didn't spend at the mall and a vacation I didn't take. Then came Greg. When Natalie met him at a barbecue 3 years ago, he seemed like the missing piece of her puzzle. He was charismatic, the kind of guy who could sell a drowning man a glass of water. He worked in telecommunications sales, and for a while, they looked like the it couple of our Sunday family dinners. But as their marriage progressed, the cracks began to show, not in their affection, but in their reality. Natalie started trading her thrift store finds for designer labels she couldn't afford. Greg started asking me pointed questions about my salary and the equity in my condo, his eyes darting around my living room like he was appraising the furniture. The real shift happened when I started dating Tyler. Tyler is a police officer, steady, observant, and completely unimpressed by Greg's bravado. Greg seemed to view Tyler's presence as a personal affront, a threat to the hierarchy he was trying to build within our family. My parents felt it too. My dad once whispered to me, "Investment requires caution, Audrey." I hope Greg isn't building a house on sand. He was doing more than that. He was building a trap. It all came to a head on a Tuesday evening that started with a deceptive warmth. Natalie invited me over for dinner, her voice vibrating with a forced kind of joy. I walked into their apartment, sparkling clean, scented with expensive candles, and a homemade tiramisu waiting on the counter, thinking I was about to be told I was going to be an aunt. Instead, Greg slid his phone across the table. The image on the screen was a sprawling, 4-bedroom colonial with a porch that looked like it belonged in a movie. It was beautiful. It was also, based on everything I knew about their fluctuating income, a financial suicide mission. "We put in an offer," Natalie said, her eyes wide and pleading. "But with Greg's recent job change, the bank, they're being difficult. They need a guarantor." The air left the room. A guarantor wasn't just a reference, it was a legal tether. If they failed and Greg's track record with jobs was a graveyard of strategic moves, I would be the one the bank came for. I'd lose my condo. I'd lose my future. I need time to think, I told them, my stomach performing a slow, sickening role. The days that followed were a blur of research and dread. My financial advisor, Linda, was blunt. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen, Audrey. Don't do it. When I tried to talk to Natalie alone at a cafe, hoping to find my sister beneath the layer of Greg's influence, she just sighed and accused me of planning for the worst. Can't you just trust me? She asked, her voice cracking. This house is our future. Our family. I trust you, Nat, I said, reaching for her hand. But this is business. Why don't we wait a few months until Greg's promotion is official? The mask slipped then. The trust she was asking for was actually blind obedience. That night, Greg sent me a text that chilled me to the bone. Guess blood isn't as thick as water after all. From there, the pressure became a physical weight. Sunday dinners turned into interrogations. Greg would sneer at my precious financial security, while Natalie played the martyr, whispering that she thought she could count on me. It felt like I was being hunted by my own flesh and blood. Tyler warned me that this was financial coercion, but I couldn't wrap my head around the idea that my sister would ever truly hurt me. The ambush at my office was the turning point. They showed up in the lobby, dressed like they were going to a funeral, demanding I sign the papers right then and there in a public conference room. When I refused, Natalie's words were a knife to the heart. If you can't do this for me, maybe we need to reevaluate our relationship. I went home and did what I do best. I prepared. I looked into the shadows Greg was trying to hide. What I found was a nightmare. Maxed out cards, collections, and a previous mortgage default. He wasn't looking for a formality, he was looking for a sacrificial lamb. I spent Thursday evening putting together a folder for them, a lifeline of alternative options, first-time homebuyer programs, and more affordable listings. I thought if I showed them I still cared, if I offered a bridge instead of a wall, we could survive this. I even ordered Natalie's favorite Thai food, waiting for a knock that I hoped would lead to a conversation. The knock came at 9:30 p.m. But it wasn't a conversation. It was a siege. Greg's face through the peephole was a distorted mask of rage. I barely had the chain on the door before he was screaming, his voice echoing through the hallway. Open the door. We know you're in there. I managed to text Tyler a quick, frantic message before Greg threw his entire weight against the door. The security chain, the one I thought kept me safe, snapped like a twig. He stormed in, Natalie trailing behind like a ghostly shadow, her face pale, but her eyes hard. The bank called, Greg roared, his breath heavy with the scent of cheap bourbon. We lost the house because of you. Because you're so selfish. I offered you alternatives, Greg. I shouted back, my voice trembling as I pointed to the folder on the table. I found houses you can actually afford. He didn't even look at it. He swept the folder off the table, the papers I had spent hours organizing fluttering to the floor like wounded birds. You think we want your charity? You think you're better than us? I know about the debt, Greg, I said, the words finally coming out. I looked at Natalie. Nat, did you know? He has defaults. He has collections. He was never going to get that loan, with or without me. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Natalie looked at Greg, confusion flickering in her eyes for a split second, but Greg didn't let the doubt take root. He stepped between us, his shadow looming over me. Shut up, he screamed. And before I could even raise my hands to protect myself, his arms swung in a blur of motion. The force of the blow sent me spinning. My head cracked against the corner of the dining room table, and the world exploded into a kaleidoscope of white light and searing pain. I hit the floor hard, my shoulder taking the brunt of the fall with a sickening pop that made me scream, a sound that was cut short by the metallic taste of my own blood filling my mouth. I lay there, gasping, my vision swimming. I waited for Natalie to scream. I waited for her to shove him away, to kneel beside me, to be the protector she had been for 25 years. Instead, I heard the soft click of her heels on the hardwood as she walked over to where I lay. She didn't reach down. She didn't call 911. She just looked at me, her face a mask of cold, clinical disappointment. You should have signed the mortgage, Audrey, she whispered. And as the darkness started to pull at the edges of my vision, I realized that the sister I loved hadn't just watched me bleed, she had decided I deserved it. The world didn't just go dark, it shattered. When Greg's hand collided with my face, it wasn't just the physical impact of bone on bone, it was the sound of 25 years of sisterhood snapping like a dry twig. I hit the floor, and for a second, the only thing I could hear was a high-pitched ringing, a lonely whistle that seemed to signal the end of my life as I knew it. My shoulder screamed, a white-hot agony that radiated from the joint where it had popped out of its socket, but as I looked up, the physical pain was eclipsed by a horror so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. Natalie was standing right there. She didn't scream. She didn't lunge at him. She didn't even reach for her phone to call 911. She just stood there, her hands hovered near her mouth in a gesture that looked more like contemplative shock than desperate intervention. I reached out with my one good arm, my fingers trembling as they brushed the hardwood floor, trailing streaks of red. "Natalie, please," I choked out, the words thick with the blood pooling in my mouth. She took one step. Just one. I thought, this is it. This is the moment my protector comes back. But she didn't look at me. She looked at Greg. "Greg, that's enough," she said, her voice eerily calm, as if she were telling a child to stop splashing in a puddle. "Let's just go." She wasn't saving me. She was saving him from the inconvenience of further violence. Greg stood over me, his chest heaving, looking down at my broken form not with regret, but with the smug satisfaction of a man who had finally exerted the control he craved. "You brought this on yourself," he spat, the words landing harder than his fists. As they turned to leave, I managed to find one last shred of breath. "How can you let him do this?" Natalie paused in the doorway. For a heartbeat, I saw a flicker of the girl who used to braid my hair, the sister who promised we'd always be a team. Then, the mask hardened. A stranger with my sister's eyes looked at me and delivered the sentence that would play on a loop in my head for the rest of my life. "You should have just signed the mortgage." Then, the door clicked shut. I don't know how long I lay there in the silence of my own home, watching the dust motes dance in the light of the floor lamp. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, suffocating thing that told me I was truly alone. My phone was a spiderweb of cracked glass across the room. My shoulder felt like it was being gnawed on by a serrated blade. Every time I tried to breathe, the world tilted, a nauseating spin that threatened to pull me into the black. I knew if I stayed on that floor, I might never get up. Survival is a strange, primal instinct. It doesn't care about your broken heart, only your beating one. Using my left arm, I dragged myself toward the wall, leaving a dark, smeared trail behind me. I had to get to my parents. I couldn't call Tyler, I couldn't call anyone. I was a ghost in my own apartment. The journey to the car was a descent into hell. Every stair was a mountain. I had to slide down sideways, my teeth gritted so hard I thought they might shatter, my left hand white-knuckled on the railing. By the time I reached the driver's seat of my car, I was drenched in a cold sweat that smelled of iron and fear. Driving one-handed with a dislocated shoulder and a blurring vision from a concussion is a feat of madness, but I did it. I spoke to myself the whole way, a desperate litany to keep the darkness at bay. "Almost there, Audrey. Just 3 more blocks. Don't close your eyes. Don't you dare close your eyes." When I pulled into my parents' driveway, the sight of their porch light felt like the gates of heaven. I didn't even park properly. I just let the car roll to a stop and stumbled toward the door. My knees gave out just as I reached the wood, and my knock was nothing more than a weak, bloody smear. "Who is it?" My father's voice, usually so steady, sounded sharp with late-night suspicion. "Dad, it's me," I whispered. The door flew open, and the scream that tore from my mother's throat is a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of a mother seeing her child destroyed. My father caught me before I hit the porch, his strong arms the first bit of safety I'd felt in what seemed like an eternity. "Greg," I managed to slur, my lips twice their normal size. "He attacked me." Natalie, she just watched. The chaos that followed was a blur of sirens and strobe lights. I remember the cold tile of my parents' kitchen floor, my mother's tears hitting my hand as she held a compress to my face, and the low, dangerous rumble of my father's voice as he spoke to the 911 operator. Then the paramedics were there, their voices professional and clipped, talking about orbital fractures and level 2 trauma. I saw the police officer's face when he knelt beside my gurney. He looked at my blood-soaked clothes, and the way my eye was already swelling into a dark, angry plum. "Who did this, ma'am?" "Greg Walsh," I whispered. "My brother-in-law." "And your sister?" "She watched," I said, the words feeling like glass in my throat. And then she left. The hospital was a whirlwind of fluorescent lights and agony. Resetting a shoulder is a special kind of torture that no amount of morphine can quite mask. I lay in that high-walled bed, feeling the stitches being pulled through my skin, eyebrow, lip, cheek, and realized that every mark would be a permanent map of my sister's betrayal. Tyler arrived while the sun was still a gray smudge on the horizon. He was still in uniform, his face ashen, his hands shaking as he took mine. "I got your text, Audrey. I was at a scene. I didn't see it in time. I'm so sorry." "I'm so sorry." "Not your fault," I croaked. "They're looking for him," Tyler said, his voice dropping into that hard, copper-edged tone he used for work. "This isn't just a domestic dispute. This is aggravated assault. This is a felony. And Natalie, Audrey, if she was there and didn't help, she's in serious trouble too." The reality of that set in over the next few days. My parents were shells of themselves, caught between the instinct to protect me and the soul-crushing realization that their other daughter had become a monster's accomplice. My father stood guard at my hospital door like a sentinel, his jaw set in a way that told me he'd never let Greg near me again. When the police finally caught them 3 days later at a grimy motel 30 miles away, the news didn't bring me the peace I expected. It just brought more pain. Natalie hadn't gone home. She hadn't called the hospital to see if I was alive. She had fled with the man who had broken her sister's face. She had chosen him. A week later, I was back at my parents' house, hidden away in my childhood bedroom. The house that once felt like a playground now felt like a fortress. The physical healing was slow. My face was a mosaic of purple, green, and yellow, but the legal gears were turning fast. The state was picking up the charges. They didn't need my permission to prosecute a man who had nearly beaten someone to death over a mortgage signature. Then came the phone call. My mother put it on speaker, her hand trembling. It was Natalie. "Mom, you have to talk to Audrey." Natalie's voice was thin, reedy, stripped of its usual confidence. "Greg made a mistake. He's stressed. If she doesn't drop the charges, we're going to lose everything. He lost his job. We'll be homeless." My father erupted. "A mistake? Natalie, look at your sister. You saw what he did. He broke her orbital bone. He dislocated her shoulder. And you left her there to bleed out." "I know it looks bad," Natalie whimpered, and that phrase, "it looks bad," was the final nail in the coffin. "But he's going to get counseling. Audrey is just being vindictive. She's destroying the family." "No," my mother said, her voice like a frozen blade. "You destroyed this family when you walked out that door. If you stay with him, Natalie, do not call this house again. You are no daughter of mine." The silence that followed was the sound of a bridge burning. The trial was a cold, clinical autopsy of our relationship. I had to sit there, my arm in a sling, and look at Greg in his oversized suit, trying to look like a victim of financial stress. I had to look at Natalie, sitting behind him, her eyes fixed on the back of his head with a devotion that made me want to scream. When the prosecutor played the hallway security footage, showing Greg kicking in my door and Natalie walking in right behind him, uncoerced and calm, the courtroom went silent. When I stood on that stand and recounted her final words, even the court reporter looked away. "Guilty," the jury said. It only took them 3 hours. 8 years, the judge said. Natalie's scream echoed through the room when they led Greg away in handcuffs. It wasn't a scream for me. It wasn't a scream for the sister she'd lost. It was for him. Now, 6 months later, I look in the mirror and see the thin white line above my eyebrow. It's a permanent part of me now. I have a new apartment with a security detail and a door that doesn't need a chain. I have Tyler, who still looks at me like I'm the bravest person he's ever met. And yesterday, I got a letter. Natalie's handwriting. She's alone now. She filed for divorce after the money ran out and the reality of an 8-year prison sentence set in. She says she's in therapy. She says she was manipulated. She says she wants to talk. I held that letter over the trash can for a long time, looking at the return address. The sister who protected me on the playground is dead. The woman who wrote this letter is a stranger who watched me bleed. Gemini said the letter sat on my mahogany coffee table for 3 days, a small white rectangle that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the looped Ys and the cramped, hurried slant of Natalie's script. For a year, that handwriting had been the stuff of my nightmares, appearing on legal documents and restraining orders. Now it was just ink on paper, a tentative bridge being extended from a woman who had once stood over me and watched my life's blood stain the floor. Audrey, the letter began, the ink slightly smeared as if her hand had been shaking. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even know if I deserve to ask for it, but I need you to know that I am getting help now. My therapist says I was in an emotionally abusive relationship that distorted my thinking and my loyalties. That is not an excuse for what I did or what I failed to do that night. Nothing can excuse that. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could watch her sister be hurt and do nothing. I read those words until they blurred. There was a time, not so long ago, when I would have torn this paper into 1,000 pieces and felt nothing but a cold, jagged triumph. But standing in my new apartment, with the sun streaming through the reinforced windows and the hum of a city that no longer felt like a hunting ground, I felt something else. I felt a profound, hollow pity. When I took the letter to my therapist, she didn't tell me what to do. She never did. She just leaned back in her chair, her eyes kind and observant. How does this make you feel, Audrey? Confused, I admitted, my fingers tracing the scar on my lip, a habit I couldn't seem to break. A part of me wants to believe she's actually sorry. That the girl who used to chase away my bullies is still in there somewhere, buried under the wreckage of her marriage. But I don't know if I can ever trust her. I don't even know if I want to try. Reconciliation is not an obligation, she reminded me, her voice steady. It's a choice. And it's one that should be made based on what supports your healing, not on family expectations or some misplaced sense of guilt. Whatever you decide, it has to be on your timeline, not hers. That was the theme of my new life, timelines and boundaries. I decided not to answer. Not yet. I gave myself the luxury of silence, a commodity I had fought so hard to reclaim. My parents were navigating their own wreckage. The trial had been a mirror they didn't want to look into, reflecting every moment they might have missed, every warning sign they might have ignored. They started attending a support group for parents of adult children in crisis. It was a humbling, agonizing process for them. We always thought family meant supporting each other no matter what, my father said one evening over dinner. He looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a new clarity in his gaze. Now we understand that true support sometimes means holding people accountable, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. My mother reached across the table, her hand finding mine. We will always regret not seeing the monster Greg was, Audrey. But we are so proud of the woman you've become. You showed us what real strength looks like. You didn't just survive, you rose. And I was rising. 6 months after Greg was sent away, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I walked into the local community college and pitched a workshop. I didn't want to talk about marketing or office management. I wanted to talk about the one thing that had almost cost me my life, financial independence as a form of self-protection. I called the workshop The Shield. We covered the basics, building emergency funds, credit scores, and the terrifying legal fine print of co-signed loans. But we also talked about the psychology of it. We talked about how money is often the first tool an abuser uses to build a cage. The first night, 30 women showed up. By the 3rd month, we had to move to the auditorium to hold nearly 100. I saw myself in their eyes, the fear, the hesitation, and the spark of hope when they realized they could hold the keys to their own lives. Tyler was there for the 4th session. He sat in the very back row, his large frame looking out of place in the plastic student chair, watching me with an expression of such pure, unadulterated pride that it made my breath hitch. After the room cleared out and the echoes of the women's voices faded, he walked down the aisle toward me. He didn't say anything at first. He just reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I had this whole plan, he said, his voice uncharacteristically rough. A fancy dinner, a sunset, the whole routine. But watching you tonight, seeing how you turned your deepest pain into a purpose for others. I just couldn't wait. I don't want to wait another second to ask you to share your life with me. He opened the box. The diamond was simple, classic, and brilliant, a stone formed under immense pressure. Just like I was. My heart hammered against my ribs. I loved him. I loved his steadiness, his kindness, and the way he had stood by me when I was a broken mosaic of bruises and trauma. But I took a breath, honoring the woman I had become. Can I think about it? I asked softly. Tyler didn't flinch. He didn't get angry or hurt. He just smiled, a tender, knowing look. Not because I don't love you, I added quickly, but because I want to be sure I'm saying yes from a place of strength, not from a need to be saved. Take all the time you need, Audrey, he said, closing the box, but keeping my hand in his. The question isn't going anywhere. Neither am I. 2 weeks later, after long walks and even longer talks with my therapist about the difference between healthy partnership and reactive dependency, I invited him over to my apartment. I made dinner, the same Thai food I had ordered the night of the attack, a small, private act of reclaiming my history. Yes, I told him as we sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like fallen stars. The yes didn't feel like a relief. It felt like a commitment, not just to him, but to the life we were going to build together on a foundation of mutual respect and ironclad boundaries. The anniversary of the attack arrived with a quiet, heavy significance. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, the steam from the shower fading, and I really looked at myself. The scars were there, but they were faint now, thin, silvery lines that only showed if the light hit them just right. I traced the one above my eyebrow. It no longer felt like a brand of shame. It felt like a medal. That evening, we hosted a dinner. My parents were there, laughing with Tyler's friends. My colleagues from the firm were there, the people who had covered my shifts and sent me flowers when I couldn't even open my eyes. It was my chosen family, the people who had proven, through the darkest year of my life, that love is a verb, not just a word. Natalie was not there. But in my purse sat a draft of a letter I had finally written back. I hadn't forgiven her, not yet, and maybe not ever in the way she wanted, but I had opened a door. I suggested coffee. A neutral place. A place with exits. As the night wound down, I stood up to offer a toast. My hand was steady as I raised my glass. To boundaries that protect, I said, looking around the room at the faces of the people who truly loved me. To the courage that rebuilds. And to the love that respects. Thank you for showing me what a real family looks like. Later, as Tyler helped me clear the plates, he caught my eye. You okay, AUD? I leaned against the counter, feeling the solid weight of the floor beneath my feet and the quiet peace in my chest. I'm more than okay, I realized, and for the first time, I knew it was the truth. I finally feel at peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because I know I can trust myself. I know I can protect what matters. I looked out at the living room, once a scene of violence, now filled with the warmth of friendship and the scent of a home I had built for myself. I had lost a sister, but I had found my soul. Have you ever had to choose between what family expects of you and what you need to survive? Have you ever had to walk away from the people who share your blood to find the people who truly share your heart? Thank you for walking this path with me. Take care of yourselves. You are worth the protection you give to others. Good luck.